Hi, I'm Shade. It has been an incredible couple of weeks. Like, I don't know what to make of it. The murders of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and Ahmaud Arbery have sparked a response that I don't know if I've ever seen the like of it. Like, I feel like friends and I are kind of saying to each other, does this feel different to you? Because there have been other murders and there's been protests and there's been, outrage, and then things kind of go back to normal again. But we're kind of saying to each other, do you feel like there's something different about this time? Like there might be long-lasting, maybe more systematic change. The conversation that is happening and happening globally just feels like it is deeper. And I don't know if maybe it's because we're in the middle of a pandemic and people have been thinking about their mortality and how they're living their lives, and just how we are interacting as a global community. I don't know what it is, but it just feels like these protests are about real long-lasting change. And I thought I felt like I didn't really have anything to add to the conversation, but this weekend publishing has been having a discussion about anti-black racism on Twitter. There's been a hashtag that they're using called publishing paid me, and I saw it yesterday and I was just like, okay, what? Authors are sharing, mostly non-black authors are sharing the advances they're being paid by publishing companies, and I'll explain a bit later what that means. But this is something that people don't do. There's no transparency around how much people get paid for the books that they write, and the fact that people are laying this out and sharing and comparing so that we can get a sense of the inequality there is between white authors and black authors, it just feels unprecedented. I was sending it to friends like, can you believe this? Yeah, it's incredible, extraordinary. I've been talking about inequality in publishing for over a decade. My blog, Coffee Bookshelves, I started it because I love books, I love stories, I love to read, and I just felt like it was really hard to find books by black authors, and when I did, they were black American authors, which is good, but is not. I wanted to find books by black British authors that reflected my identity more closely, and that was such a tall order. So whenever I got a recommendation or I heard about a book or saw something, I would make a note of it, share it with friends, and I'm like, you know what, this is probably a resource that would be useful to more people than me. So let me start a blog, let me keep track of the recommendations I'm getting, and things that I found, so other people can make use of it as well. But that also sparked the question of why? Why is it so hard to find books by black British authors, and to find books that are not literary fiction, that are not about slavery and oppression and racism? Because those books were out there too in small numbers, but books that are about romance and mystery and crime, books in other genres, books that aren't just about being black. Like, there's, it's like we're human too, and we have all these experiences, and where are the books that reflect this? And it's so hard to find. And so the blog also became about answering that question of what is going on in publishing? Why is this so hard? So I've been writing my blog haphazardly, very arbitrarily, for over a decade, and talking to black authors, black editors, black agents, all kinds of people who work in publishing, trying to figure out what the issue is. And there's a lot of different issues. There's a lot of gatekeeping that happens. I love data when it comes to publishing, because there are things that you think are happening, but you can't quite put your finger on it. And then, when you find a survey or something, you're like, yes, that's what I thought it was, and it's real. Somebody's crunched the numbers. So there was a report in 2015 called Writing the Future, and it was commissioned by a writers development agency in the UK. And let me find the quote. So, to the question of why are there only certain types of stories being published by Black British authors, and this survey or this research concluded, in a market dominated by mass market fiction, it appears that the best chance of publication for a BAME, so Black or Asian minority ethnic novelist, is to write literary fiction that conforms to a stereotypical view of Black or Asian communities. So it's like agents and then acquiring editors at publishing houses were only acquiring books that fitted a stereotype of Black and Asian communities, and that were about that were literary fiction, so not genre fiction, and I guess that were basically about your racial identity or your experience as a person of color. So and the fact that it starts in a market dominated by mass market fiction, so the biggest genres are romance, mystery, crime, but we're going to ignore that. When it comes to people of color, you can only publish literary fiction. So that was it was great to just have that confirmed, that yeah, when I go into a bookshop and I can't find anything in the genre sections by Black British authors, this is why, because the gatekeepers are only selecting these kinds of books. In 2017, there was a report in children's publishing that said, got all these stats somewhere, that said that out of 9,000 books, over 9,000 books that were published in 2017, only 4% of them had a character in them that was an ethnic minority. 4% of 9,000 books. And only 1% had a main character that was not white out of over 9,000 children's books. So again, when you're looking for books for children by an author who is not white, it's so hard to find, and this is why, because the numbers of what's been published are so minuscule. And then out of the books that were being published, most of them were contemporary realism, so they weren't fantasy, nothing magical. It was stuff that was set in a contemporary landscape, so this housing estate over here or something. 10% of them were social justice stories, so this child had come from a war-torn country as a refugee, this is their experience. And I think they said that only one book published for children in 2017 with a character that was an ethnic minority was a comedy. One book out of over 9,000 books published that year for children, only one had a leading character that was of color and was a comedy. So everything else is heaviness for kids. It's actually crazy. And these numbers are even more terrible when you think about the fact that 32% of children in the UK are ethnic minorities. 32%, and only 4% of the books that are published in 2017 had a character that was from an ethnic minority background. The numbers are just dire. There was also another study that was done in 2017 that showed that in the US, 79% of people that work in publishing are white. 78% of them are women. In the UK, 90% of them were white. 84% of them women. So when you thinking about the gatekeepers who are deciding what should be published, if 90% of the people who work in that industry are white, there's only a certain perspective that's happening. Why does it matter? Why does it matter? Why does it make a difference? I mean, they are professionals, they care about putting out books of the highest standard possible. Why does it matter who's working in publishing and what kind of books they are putting out? It matters because stories build civilizations. You think about, if I said, you know, picture ancient China, and you know, you weren't there in ancient China, but you'd probably think, okay, maybe I've seen House of Flying Daggers. I have an idea of what kind of clothes they might have been wearing, what kind of houses they might have lived in. Maybe I've seen the film Hero. Maybe I've seen the cartoon Mulan, also in ancient China. But the stories about an era and about a place and about a people give you a sense of that place and those people. If I said picture Tudor England, you weren't there, but you're thinking, okay, Henry VIII killing off his 6 wives, you know, Elizabeth I, the Armada, you know, those massive dresses, people put in, I don't know what that stuff was they used to put on their face to make it super white, that used to give them, that used to poison them, but that stuff. You know, you've got some kind of image that you can conjure up, and it comes from stories, it comes from books, from paintings, from films, from music, from art, and it gives you a narrative of that time and that place and that people. If I said picture the US in the 1800s, then you think of, you know, Taming of the Wild West, which would be absolute BS because, you know, really it was stealing land from people, from indigenous people, and then a century later creating a whole film genre that made it look like what you were doing was taming the Wild West. Through stories, they managed to build a whole mythology around what the US was in that particular period. And that's what stories are, right? You build a civilization, you construct, or you kind of convey culture. So if somebody else is telling your stories for you, they are deciding what stories to tell or how to tell it or how to depict you. Or if nobody's telling your stories, then you kind of don't exist. You know, if you're like, what does ancient Africa look like in your mind? What does it look like? Like, you know, is it the heart of darkness where it's just a black mass and savages out there and it's dangerous and maybe people are hanging from trees? Like, I don't know, but we need stories to fill in the gaps. Publishing is such a weird system, and it's something that honestly I feel like I'm gonna spend a lifetime just trying to get to the heart of it. Like, how does it work? You know, who came up with this system of publishing a book? I'm taking a course right now at Rice and University, and it's so illuminating, it's so interesting learning how the whole thing works. So at a very basic level, you know, you've got your author wants to write a book or has written a book, and now they want to get this book out. So they approach a publishing house. I mean, they'll probably go through an agent, but somehow they find their way to a publishing house, and the publishing house is then going to figure out, okay, let's come up with a contract, so you know what you're going to get out of this, and we know what we're going to get out of this, and now we're going to, you know, put an editor on the case who's going to help you, you know, fine-tune the book that you've written, and then we're going to get a copy editor who's going to go through and make sure it all makes sense, and then we're going to get a proofreader to make sure that you haven't got crazy typos in there, and then we've got to, you know, lay this format, your text, into a book format, typeset it. We've got to get a cover design done, so graphic designer. We've got to, you know, then get it printed on certain paper, bound. Then we've got to box it all up, put these books into boxes, put them into trucks and ship them off to places. And then your book arrives, you know, in a place where people can buy it. There's a whole heap of people that are involved in that process. Everybody needs to get paid. Publishing is expensive. It's expensive and it's complicated. But it's important, like it matters that we get books out there, that we get these stories out there. And it matters who's doing this because of the influence that books have, the influence that it has on people's perception of places and people.